Hey, I am so excited and grateful for the opportunity to share with you my passion for my newest book, Know What You Don't Know. After writing Chasing Mission Fit, I really received such a warm reception of that book. And it was really like, hey, this is really what we need. This is something that we really think it will make a big difference. We are going to pivot our marketing to kind of go after those mission fit students, which has been wonderful. And I'm very grateful for that. But one thing I realized is that as I started seeing that happen, a lot of the leaders were leaning into that, but not asking the questions about what they needed to do to make that happen. They were not asking the right questions. And so I realized that a lot of senior leaders, because they are so much experts in other things, didn't have a working literacy of marketing. So they didn't know the right questions to ask when they were talking about building a digital advertising campaign, or didn't know the questions to ask about, putting together a website, or how they might need to assess a program, whether to bring it on or sunset it. And so what I did is I really wanted to create a new book, really focused on what every higher ed leader needs to know about marketing. And so I put together this book to just kind of go through to help explain in common language and easy language, what are the main questions you need to be asking? And so that's why I wrote this book. That's why I'm passionate about this. That's why I'm passionate about, getting resources out there for leaders, especially leaders of small schools and schools that might not have the resources or the teams that larger institutions might have. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to make good decisions and make good investments and steward your resources well. So really looking forward to sharing this with you now.
You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. I am Troy Singer and always pleased and proud to be with my friend and co-host Bart Kaler. Today, our guest is Nate Mouttet. He is the Senior Director of University Partnerships at U.S. News and World Report. Nate brings over 2 decades of experience in higher education enrollment, marketing, and strategic counseling. Before joining U.S. News, he served in enrollment leadership at Seattle Pacific University and North Park University, and also worked with institutions across the country through R&L, helping them scale graduate and online programs through research, funnel optimization, and marketing innovation. Now at the helm of the University Partnerships at U.S. News, Nate helps colleges and universities amplify their national visibility, tap into student insights through data analytics, and adapt to a rapidly evolving digital search landscape, including the impact of AI.
Yeah, Troy, this is such a fun episode, and Nate and I go way back. I was trying to figure out, it might be a couple decades now that I've known Nate in the various roles, and so it's fun to have a friend on the podcast. Everybody that's on the podcast has become our friends, but this is somebody that I've known for a while, and I've run into Nate at a few different conferences over the last year or two, and so he and I have got a chance to kind of reconnect and catch up a little bit, and so really excited to have him on the podcast. He brings a lot of knowledge, not only from just what he's doing at U.S. News, but also just what he has been able to bring to the relationships that he has now through his experiences. I mean, serving in marketing at CCCU, serving in enrollment at North Park and there at Seattle. So it's a fun episode, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with everyone.
It's not only fun because the two of you know one another, but this is an episode that I truly believe every college and university can get benefit from listening to.
Totally agree.
Here's our conversation with Nate Mouttet. Nate, you mentioned that you are a listener of the show, so this question should not be a surprise to you. We are going to ask you to share something that you have recently learned that would be deemed fun or maybe surprising by our guests.
That's great. Thanks, Troy. Yes, I am a longtime listener and first-time caller, so thanks for letting me join you. I've got 2 things, and actually one is when a 12-year-old gets in the car after school and has some cool science fact to share, you have to pass it along. So as he gave it to me, I want to make sure I give it to you. He said all the DNA in a single human body, if uncoiled and connected end to end, would actually stretch to the sun and back 600 times. Now, I was a little skeptical, so I actually went and looked it up, and sure enough, his translation, it wasn't a game of gossip, his translation from his science teacher to me was pretty accurate. So evidently our with like 300 trillion cells and each containing 2 meters of DNA, it's about 67 billion miles long. Didn't know that. That was cool. And on the business side, I've got a fun fact, because last week we found out that in 2025, of all the news releases that PR Newswire publishes on their site, the U.S. News Best Colleges News Release in 2025 for the 2026 ranking was the most popular news release on the PR Newswire platform. And so it says something about actually the visibility we bring to higher ed.
Yes, Nate, very cool. And I think for that first tidbit, we may need to give your son some name recognition here.
Yeah, Josh Mouttet would be, if he wants a byline, he'll gladly go with Josh Mouttet. It's good.
Very good. Nate, for the reason why we have you on the podcast today, we would love to know all things relevant to the U.S. News Enroll Report annual college rankings that come out every year. If you could start out by telling us a little bit about how this was created or why it was recreated, and then how it's become so relevant within higher ed.
Well, thanks again for having me. And yeah, I'm glad to kind of unpack this a bit, as I'm relatively new to U.S. News. I'm still, in my own learning, but in my discovery, what I've found is that U.S. News, like many journalistic publications, has had a long history of trying to be a trusted and informed source for consumers. And in fact, the mission of U.S. News is to help consumers make informed decisions. And so if you can go back in the Wayback Machine, back to about the 80s, many of us probably actually even know that reference, the Wayback Machine would take you to a period when, if you think about it, colleges often were known by, the circles that you ran in. So if you were in a church and people recommended a certain school, you knew that school. If you're in a social, in a social certain strata, your friends or your relatives would recommend certain schools. And so U.S. News was really trying to put more data and kind of data journalism, and which is the direction they were going, and that we have gone since then, is really trying to collect data that was already known about universities. And so I lightheartedly sometimes reference, if your aunt or uncle used to tell you a school was good, you kind of thought it probably was good, and you went there. But the corner really turned as societally, we all loved rankings of colleges for football and for basketball. I think U.S. News started realizing there are factors that can be tracked. And those factors became, very obvious. Department of Ed had been established for another time, that conversation right now. But a Department of Ed had been established and was collecting things like iPads. And so U.S. News was really capturing that public data and then turning it with some additional appended data into things that would give some more clarity to what is considered quality and what is considered academic excellence. From national and regional and public and private, faith-based and secular, all those things were kind of, brought into kind of a more of a mix that could be tracked. And in fact, it was really championed by a guy that some people might know on this podcast by the name of Bob Morse. Bob was kind of often the person they would see, come out from U.S. News at a conference or an institutional researchers gathering. And so Bob had been the champion for about 40 years of that, and he literally just retired this past summer. I came on board in April. I got to meet him briefly. It was a little funny. I probably wanted to get his autograph, and he's an old researcher. He probably didn't care about that, but he was the champion of that. And then the succession has happened that there's been people who've been in his proteges for about 20 years are now leading the ranking process for us.
That's pretty exciting, and I know that I've kind of seen that change across the times. It's funny. I think in 2001, 2000, maybe 2000, my company at the time was featured in that magazine article as one of the the new breed of consultants who were doing this new information superhighway thing. And so that's kind of a funny thing. That's why I've kind of gotten used to how I pronounce U.S. News and World Report from that. But just a tiny fact there. But I think over the time of just kind of observing it over the last 25, 30 years that I've paid attention to it, there's a lot that's changed. So talk us a little bit about the methodology and maybe even some of the public perception in the recent years as there's a lot of ways people can go and look for things, but tell me a little bit about what U.S. News is doing.
Yeah, that's helpful, Bart. The framing is that, again, consistent with the mission of making sure consumers can make informed decisions. I think what people have had an appetite for and what we've received as feedback from universities and consumers has continued to evolve over the 40 years now plus of ranking. So kind of staying consistent with that mission of, helping make informed decisions. Measurements particularly like graduation rates, as families are caring more and more about, will a student actually get through this university? Graduation rate, graduate indebtedness, social mobility, all those indicators have really grown in their weight in the ranking. And anytime someone wants to see this, you can go to U.S. News, and there's literally, both webinars, webcasts, and detailed data about our methodology. But they've really grown to be about 50% of the total weight of a best colleges ranking, whether it's in a regional or a national category. And then there's always small adjustments that get done. This year, there were some small adjustments, particularly around, and this is actually relevant for all the marketers in higher ed who really know how student engagement with universities has changed. So historically, it often was weighted slightly different around the number of credit hours. So were you full-time or part-time?
Right.
And that might, impact a college's ranking. We've actually backed that out as more nuanced views of institutional tracking of credit hours have changed. Standard testing has also kind of been moving down as a priority. In fact, in the Northeast, now that more regional changes around test optional or test required have changed. So that has also been a more subtle change. And then the minimum number of entering students into a graduating class, this sounds really subtle, but has gone from 20 to 25. I mean, that sounds like there's some schools that have very small graduating classes, technical or,
right,
like a design school or something else. And so the changes ensure that, graduation rates and retention rates are based on larger, more representative groups. Sometimes then schools that are smaller than that just wouldn't be ranked.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I work with a lot of different size schools. And so that helps understand that. But even there, I think sometimes, the rankings, depending on where you end up on those as a school, it gets, it's often debated. And obviously it still matters. But why do you think that these rankings remain such a powerful driver, especially for visibility and trust and I'm thinking specifically for undergrad and parents, but I know even with other types of students, they're an important part of their decision process.
Yeah, my opinion in particular on this is that, as society has gotten more fragmented, there's fewer trusted institutions, sources of information that kind of everybody can see and go, okay, I get how this is now different than this one. And I mean, almost like, I was kind of in a love-hate relationship with U.S. News because I was on the campus side in multiple
right,
instances, and I would watch carefully. I didn't say this earlier. I worked as the chief communication officer for the CCCU, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, back in the day. And we would, have all night stay up when the rollout embargo came, and we would keep track of where did everybody fall, just so we kind of had some sense of that, and we would publish news releases on that too. I think what's ended up being the reality is that our culture has a few really trusted things like Consumer Reports, for products, and J.D. Power for vehicles and trucks and cars. And you start to go, okay, I kind of know where things line up every year. And that's where U.S. News has really fallen into into a cultural expectation of understanding where different schools can fit.
So, Nate, keeping in mind visibility, reputation, and also strategic enrollment for some of the smaller schools or lesser known schools, how can U.S. News help elevate or help those schools gain national attention even beyond the report?
Yeah, it's a great, it's a helpful question because, again, I've kind of lived a little bit of that life. And that's part of what maybe both attracted, U.S. News to bring me in and why I was attracted. Because I realize at this moment in time, getting visibility nationally or just getting visibility is such a scratching and clawing kind of reality for, most private universities in the competition for attention, whether it be, on social media or just simply in the public eye. And I think there are some very practical ways, because if you, again, kind of back to when we were going back to college, and you might get the guide and you'd flip through the guide, at the grocery store line, or it might be mailed to you or your guidance counselor office. Every page had a profile for all the ranking data that came in for each school, whether it was Princeton or, Pepperdine, or it was, Pine Manor College. I mean, everything had, something, a data point. Now those data points are profiles. They're URLs. They're, you can be found. And when you do when you do a Google search or you ask Siri, tell me more, they'll take you to those pages. So I think some of the things now are really understanding how do you own that as a proxy for your own domain or your .edu as a way to kind of get additional or amplified visibility. And that's where part of my team spends time, is helping campuses with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think everybody, there's a lot of sources out there. And I think that I find a lot of times schools aren't recognizing that most of the time there's an option for them to actually go and adjust those things even without having a subscription or something, but that those exist out there. And so it's worth people kind of understanding that. But even beyond that, I know you guys have some additional tools beyond what a lot of people might know, such as Student Connect and the Academic Insights. And so help us understand a little bit how these institutions are really engaging students and understanding the market behavior using those types of tools.
Yeah, thanks. For marketers watching this, there's kind of these two most obvious resources: Academic Insights, which unfortunately shares an unfortunate abbreviation in this moment in history, that Academic Insights AI is not necessarily AI, but it's going to be enhanced by AI, as you can only imagine. Often when campuses get new leaders, like a new president or a provost, sometimes one of their first questions is, they have their own perception or their own preconceived ideas of where that school fits. Where that school fits against its competitors. Who are their competitors? Are those aspirational competitors or are those real competitors? And this tool, Academic Insights, is an interesting piece of information, because often marketers are the people, the chief marketing officer is somebody who's speaking to the president or provost, is the one trying to base this in reality. Like, I know you might think that's our competitor, or you might think we could beat that school, but I think you need to know based on, market data and others. Mm-hmm. And so you're always clamoring for, where can I get that? And sometimes you have to go out and, commission a custom piece of research. Well, now you're also struggling with, is that an apples to apples comparison on something we used to, see 10 years ago or 5 years ago? So the first, resource that I think marketers should be considering is this Academic Insights is in essence tapping into the proprietary vault of data that's 40 years. And it's a year-long longitudinal, review of everything from, perception information that comes in from the surveys, academic quality indicators that are all already being categorized and are things that you can measure and know, and institutional researchers contribute to every year. And so sometimes, in fact, I'm finding more and more campuses actually work with Academic Insights to enhance their own institutional reports for board meetings or for annual reports. And so they tap into this Academic Insights. So really, almost off the shelf, it supports marketing teams to help identify or determine how the school is perceived in the market, and to do it in an incredibly timely way. Like, you're not commissioning a report. Like, this data is sitting there ready to go. You turn it on and you plug it in. And so sometimes it takes away some of the mystery you're trying to give to like a new leader, like a president
Right.
or a provost.
I like that. I think that really gets into the granular aspects, which I love about what you guys are doing, because I think that that's so important to be able to get down to the granular level for your provost, for your president, for your board. They're going to want that. They're going to look for that. But I think even backing up a little bit higher to where we were before about just the rankings. So I know that you sat in several seats, sat in the big chair for enrollment. You did a lot of different things. And so how should enrollment and marketing leaders that are listening to the podcast today think about rankings as part of this broader brand visibility and strategy that they're doing? Because I know a lot of people, they'll get the little icon and stick it on their website and put out the press release and feel like, okay, we're done. But I think there's more to it. So kind of unpack that for me.
Yeah, and this is an interesting segue, because again, like I said, like you mentioned, I've lived on the campus side and I've tried to utilize this. Now that I can see what some of the tools are like, one of the first conversations I had was a campus, CCU NACAP member school by the name of George Fox University. They were funny to me because they were almost frenemies for me. We were kind of pitch competitors when I was at Seattle Pacific, and a group of leaders, from Rob Westervelt and Rob Felton, and now Lindsay Knox and Vanessa Spire, and some of those who are leading there. And so I had a conversation with their marketing team and said, why do you utilize U.S. News and in essence, this profile that I was mentioning back, almost like the guidebook, but now it's your profile that you can own. It's called a premium profile. It's a student connect. It allows you to connect with students through the U.S. News platform. And they basically said some interesting things to me. They were so interesting that I said, well, give me a quote on this. And so I'll just share. They said, by maintaining a profile with U.S. News, we're able to highlight what makes George Fox distinct from other nationally recognized academics and strong things like nationally recognized academics, strong job placement, and our be known promise. If you know George Fox, they've really kind of driven home this concept of being known, both from a faith standpoint and from a simply you're not just a number on that campus. Mm-hmm. But they talk about, that underscores their commitment to personal and spiritual and academic care. And then they kind of drove it home. Their presence on the U.S. News increases visibility and drives qualified traffic to our website and positions us among leading institutions to the college search process. What I tend to think about this for marketers is like we are a huge lightning rod. We are just an enormous lightning rod out into the public. And when I, lightheartedly mentioned that factoid about being the most popular news release on the PR Newswire platform, that day brought us 6 million visitors when the ranking rolled out that day. I mean, it's the equivalent of announcing, who's going to be playing in the Super Bowl or things like that hit pop culture, and everybody just checks it out for a day. If we can be a lightning rod and disperse that energy back to your individual campuses, then we become a powerful partner for marketers. It's not a competitor. We're not trying to divert interest. We're just trying to redirect interest. Mm-hmm. So how do we, if you utilize that, if you were to say, hey, I've got a page on this, I may not get 6 million visits, but I'm going to get some fraction of that at my campus at George Fox or Pepperdine or Bucknell or even Penn State. They're going to say, well, I want some of that, and I want to clarify that. So while the page is a static page of data for the ranking, you can turn around and own that and convert it into a marketing platform. Again, a proxy for your own domain. And so that's where I end up really encouraging people to say, foundationally right now in the world of AI, and we'll probably talk more about that, but in the world of AI, you need to have a strong foundation of third-party data that references you, whether it's any number of things. We can become a foundation for you to help give you confidence that you're going to get visibility even when your own website might be overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that just to kind of pick up on what you just said there for a second, Nate, is we're hearing all these I don't know, there's dire warnings about SEO, search engine optimization. What's going to happen with that? I still think we're going to have SEO, but you're going to have to amp it up with GEO, the generative engine optimization. And when you talk to, and we've done Gus Grutz was on our podcast about a year or two ago. You can listen to that podcast, but he talked a lot about the three main things that you need to think about with SEO. And it's, you need the content, you need to work on the technical aspects, and you need backlinks. And I think what Nate just talked about right there is a backlink. And if you've got a really authoritative backlink like U.S. News, that's going to help your SEO. And so these external groups that are wanting to partner with you, that are wanting to help you along the way, there's a lot of different ways that's naturally going to roll out to help your campus in a lot of different ways. And so just a quick clarification on that, Nate.
Well, you two have brought it up, so I think we should go fully into the subject, and that is the rise of AI in the college evaluation search process. So, Nate, as we all know, and articles are being written, that AI is reshaping the way that young people are finding, searching, comparing, and evaluating colleges. We'd like to know what you are seeing regarding AI and the changes that is bringing forth on your end.
Yeah, so timely, and I'm sure everybody's, got dozens of bookmarks on trying to track, what it's the latest being said. So I actually saw Bart most recently at AMA, the American Marketing Association for Higher Ed, back in late fall, early winter, and we were presenting there kind of a study that we brought to AMA for one of the plenary sessions around asking on our platform, undergraduate and graduate students, how are you utilizing AI in the research process and even down to the admissions experience? And so we've done some evaluation, and maybe I'll just say, we found different types of information that I think are interesting for marketers to understand, particularly which types of, what were the types of, this is from a report that we produced, and I'm kind of summarizing some of the high points. There were the, kind of what types of information did you get from AI agents? And it's interesting because students were looking for, more efficient ways. You ask Chat GPT, or you ask Gemini, or you ask, any number of the different AI tools, and they come back with they're wanting to understand what makes you special. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get to the non-standardized type of summary or information that is like an aggregator of from TikTok all the way to literally reports like U.S. News and others. But it's a summarization where LLMs really are at their best. They kind of give you that kind of quick aggregate. And similarly, what I was, kind of struck by is they also kind of get into some more nuanced things like, hard to find intangibles like the AI tools can tell you about campus culture, look and feel, and what students are like on that campus, what student experience is like.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, because I think that's one of the things we're focusing on with GEO is that generating content like blog posts and other content that's on a regular cadence, so that you've got that out there for them, but being able to answer the questions students are asking. And so if you've got that kind of content out there that is, what's it like to be a student on campus, and you have a blog post about that, and then you do some special things like, FAQs are really something that the LLMs like and they consume. And so there's kind of a set of rules that you can do. But I think that is so important that utilizing AI, and I love the study that you guys did. And certainly I think that we'll drop the show notes, a link over to that if people are interested in looking at that webinar you recently published on the follow up on that. But I think that's something that's really, and so for me, a lot of things excite me about where AI is going to enhance things for schools. I know a lot of schools are kind of either dealing with it with academic issues, or it's being driven out of the academic use of AI. But marketers need to grab onto this, and so it excites me to see what marketers can do utilizing information like what you're providing, what we're seeing with surveys. Kaler Solutions is getting ready to launch a survey later this spring that we did with some folks. And so it's good things. And so tell me, I just told you a little bit about what I'm excited about. What excites you most about all this stuff with the intersection of rankings, data, AI over the next couple of years?
Well, it's funny the way you preface that, because the word excite can have kind of, two meanings. And it can be, I'm positively excited or I'm anxiously excited.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think, candidly, that probably defines everybody's engagement with AI as a marketer level, because, you can see it for efficiency and you can see it for, breadth of research, literally just by asking Gemini something. I'm tipping my hat to my preferred, AI tool. We're a Google company at U.S. News, and so I use a lot of Gemini, and I'm just amazed at how well it can summarize things for me. But I think where it also leads me to some skepticism is that it atrophies some of those same muscles that we used to be really good at to go back as academics, not just marketers, but people who have an academic side. You want to go see those citations. You want to go see those sources. Like, you want to get into it. So one of the things that I think excites me is that, we can get past some of the more basic things in marketing and get to more advanced things, where marketers on campuses have, been in the slog is, hey, these great new CRMs are amazing, but how much time do I have to spend to create comm flows or, cadences? Right. Well, can your CRM now do it with much more advanced and enhanced ways that are much more personalized to your individual student that requests something? And, so now we have to be more sophisticated with attribution and source code tracking. Like, right. If we really know that better, boy, our communication is going to look a lot more refined, and students are going to expect it. And rightfully so. But they also are going to look for more authenticity. And I think this is, you talked about FAQs, how do we get into things that are taking the dialogue up a level? How do we find ways to engage and talk to students about the things that we want them to have dialogue about? And hopefully, obviously, GEO and SEO will, continue to track and capture that. But if they do authentically get to our site or we have opportunities with them, how do we have more, more depth of conversation with them? From a U.S. News standpoint, you hit on some of your, quick summary of, make sure your content is right, your website. If there's ever been a time to make sure you have got somebody grooming and tracking, I remember a few years ago, campuses were saying, well, don't promote those pages. When I was talking, in the most recent consulting world, with R&L, they would say, oh, don't elevate those pages. And I'm like, hey, those pages are being found whether or not you want us to or not. If you're not keeping up with it, that's your concern. You need to take some ownership or get those, find ways to get that, that gardening of your tending to your garden of your own website. But that third party and so Reddit and Wikipedia, YouTube, U.S. News plays a key role in this, making sure that you own as much or find ways to contribute as sophisticatedly and as intelligently as possible to that content, because it will be summarized and Geo will have the intelligence to go out and find it and resurface it. And so I think, it's a wonderful enhancement of the tools of marketing, but it's an incredible, it's an incredible audit of how well you do as a marketing team to keep up. So the small but mighty, hopefully you can use it to be a multiplier of your efforts. Yep. Find those pages on your website that don't have current by asking Gemini, but then also then immediately spending time to go back and clarify that to make better content.
Those are great suggestions. Thanks, Nate.
So we would like to bring our episode to a close by asking you a question that could be implemented right away. So if you were to give advice to a enrollment leader or marketing leader on how they could best marry or apply rankings, visibility, and AI in their strategy immediately, what would be a piece of advice you would give them?
I'll kind of give a 1A and 1B. 1A is, I just think fundamentally every campus that has ranking on U.S. News needs to own that page. They need to take advantage of it. I mean, clearly this is self-serving at one level for me to say that, but I think it's so fundamental going forward to your own SEO and GEO to magnify. I think you just have to own that and turn it into a marketing platform that you can utilize. And candidly, I'll say it's very achievable through U.S. News. It's not an onerous budget or process. But the 1B part of this is making sure that you tap into every available external option, whether it's, again, Wikipedia. We all know that you can't own it and treat it like it's your own page, but you can have alumni speak into it and be advocates for you on that, or you can make sure that you're looking for every place that can be that backlink to your content. And I think, particularly, hey, I'm on a podcast, and I said I was a long-time listener, first-time caller, because I've wanted to know the things that, Bart and Troy, what you all do to help enhance small colleges play in a bigger league. You've let a lot of small colleges punch outside their normal weight. And so I think this is an opportunity. How do you utilize all those things to help become magnifiers and multipliers of your content? I used to have a phrase that I would say when I was on campus is that universities are content farms that no one has really ever learned how to harvest. And it is so much content. I mean, things that are being said in classrooms and on syllabi, but if you could find a way to turn that into public, visibility, people would find it as an epiphany. And so I really encourage you to turn your content farm into something that can be harvested for people outside of your campus walls.
Nate, thank you for ending this conversation with a mic drop moment. Everyone, we've been talking to Nate Mouttet. He is the Senior Director of University Partnerships at U.S. News and World Report. Nate, if someone would like to reach out and get more information from you or really just connect with you after listening to this episode, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, definitely track me down on LinkedIn. Always quick to respond to DMs. But if I didn't already have a tricky enough last name, it's Mouttet, Mouttet at usnews.com is a great way to just email me or catch me. And glad to follow up. And thanks for letting me join you all.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you, Nate. Bart, what final thoughts do you have?
Well, I'm just really grateful that Nate could join us today. Nate and I go way back, and it's always fun to kind of connect with him whenever we see each other at conferences. And so I really appreciate just kind of how he unpacked everything for us. I know this is the second time that we've actually talked about U.S. News and World Report on the podcast. Adam Stoltz earlier, I think it was in the mid 100 episodes. You can go back and listen to that. But he actually did his doctorate on the U.S. News and World Report. So that'd be an interesting one for you to listen to in a adjacent to this one. But I really think that this has been an incredible tool for several decades. And I think that even just Nate's last point there about going and claiming the information that's out there about your ranked school is so worth it. I mean, again, for SEO, for GEO, for a number of reasons, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate just the way that Nate kind of talked a little bit about AI. And I appreciate just also how he kind of brought in not only his expertise from U.S. News, but also from his experience being in the marketer chair, the enrollment chair, the C-suite chair. And so, Nate, thanks again for joining us. It's encouraging to see you again.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Higher Ed Marketer. We are so excited that Bart's new book, Know What You Don't Know, What Every Higher Ed Leader Needs to Understand About Marketing, was released earlier this month. This book is a must-read and can be purchased wherever books are sold. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with a colleague and follow us on LinkedIn at The Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We will see you next week with another great guest.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.